I present to you Professor Ed Littlejohn.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Madam Chairman, Rachel. Professor Hammer made all this possible, Judge Keith. Sorry the Dean's not here today.
She will be here this afternoon. So
Reason why, I've never met her, and I hear wonderful things about her. And I was kind of thinking if she was Dean when I was here, I'd probably still be here. Because I never got along with deans at this school, not a single one of them, as Judge Keith pointed out. It was usually over matters of race and racism and things that were happening at a law school that I thought probably could have been done somewhat differently. So that's yet to comment. I just want to make one correction with all the accolades Peter gave me. One correction, the marching to justice video I had nothing to do with. That was the work of Bob Smith. Bob, is that you back there? So I wanted to correct that. He's very talented with the video. The rest of it I'll take credit for. And I kind of think I'm sort of a living parody of Thomas Wolfe. If you live long enough, you probably can go home again. And if you get so old and live long enough that most of your people who knew you best have moved on somewhere, you can go back home and you can go home again and you can go home as a hero. So I'm very thankful to be here. I didn't think this would happen, and I'm very appreciative of it, Professor Hammer and the Journal of Law and Society. They gave me an hour. I don't think I'll take that much, a little behind schedule. I did want to point out, and I really want to talk a little history and talk to students, students to understand what was, so when you meet with the distinguished panelists on what is and what is likely to come, that you'll have some kind of foundation on which to build that. And speaking of panelists, it's outstanding. I think the Law Journal put together a great panel, 3 panels, great persons. I wish I had time to introduce all of them because they're all footnotes in history, important people in the history of the development of law in this community. I am, however, going to introduce one of the panelists, and I'm sure he won't like it, but I'm going to do it. And for the reason is, he flew here from Florida, came in yesterday, leaving this afternoon. He came up from Florida just to be here today. So I want to comment on him. And of course, my main thing is history. This panelist, where do you start? He was the second person of color to sit on the Michigan Supreme Court. Ran for election after being appointed and was elected in a statewide election. Plenty of firsts. While he was on the Michigan Supreme Court, he was voted the most respected judge in Michigan. Twice elected mayor of the city of Detroit. And he had the good sense while he was mayor, he appointed me to the first chair of the Board of Ethics, the Board of Ethics for the city of Detroit. It's kind of interesting, if these little vignettes of history that we don't know very much about. I was the first chair of the Board of Ethics under the 1973 charter. It was 20 years old, the charter. There had never been a chair of ethics because Coleman Young was the mayor. And when I was I was chairman of the police commission, sort of Board of Ethics, ombudsman, they had something to do with one another. And I asked Coleman, I said, Coleman, why don't we have a chairman of the Board of Ethics? And those of you who know Coleman can appreciate his response. Ed, we don't need any damn chairman of the Board of Ethics. I'll take care of all the damn ethics we need in the city of Detroit. And classic Coleman Young. After being a 2-term mayor, became the chairman of Dickinson Wright law firm, major law firm. For you young historians, it was the first major law firm that hired a black lawyer, 1970, Dickinson Wright, and they kind of led the field after that, not only with African-American lawyers, but with women. He first person of color to be the state bar president. He's also president of Wolverine Bar, National Bar Association, Black Bar. And more importantly, he was the first person of color to be the president of the American Bar Association. Now, many of you don't understand what the importance of that is. In 1911, 3 black lawyers slipped into the American Bar Association. 1911. They found out about them, they kicked one out, they couldn't get the other 2 out, but they set up a procedure where no black lawyer could join the American Bar Association from 1911 into the late 1950s. And Dennis was the first president of that. And lastly, one of his major accomplishments was he was in what I call the great class of 1970. That was a class at Detroit College of Law, pre-affirmative action. There were 10 black graduates in that class. The largest number of black law students to graduate from a law school starting from 1870, when the first black law student graduated from the University of Michigan, up to 1970. The largest number, 10. And it was, I'm gonna tell you, it was tough getting through the Detroit College of Law. And I don't know, I think Gad Holland is here. He's another historian. I think he told me there was a class at Wayne that had more than 10, but it was post-affirmative action. So Dennis and I were in that class. We called it the Great Class in 1970. Please, I could go on and on and on, I think. But anyway, let's give Dennis thanks for coming up. For you women who are concerned about this, there was one woman in our class. One. Now, DCL had a habit of graduating 4 classes together, 2 days, 2 nights, to put them all together to have one class. There were 5 women in 4 classes in 1970. That's not that long ago. That's how it was. Now you're running a little 50% or more. The journal asked me to talk about the several panels today from my own personal history. My first reaction to that was, I'm not going to do that. Now, who the hell wants to get up here and talk about themselves? Then I thought about it for a minute and thought it might be good if we have young people here that would understand some of this that happened not too long ago. We're talking about my lifetime. Things that happened not too long ago that seem to be very contemporary in some ways, just a lot different. You can read all you have to do is read the daily newspaper. Baltimore, Maryland, Chicago, Illinois, New York, Cleveland, Black Lives Matter. It gives rise to that, things that are going on in our communities with regard to police. Look at the United States Supreme Court Justice docket. Case coming up, Fisher versus the University of Texas. Another major affirmative action decision on the bubble. I'm not optimistic about that case because I think there's a risk, a threat that minority admission, especially African Americans, is in very serious jeopardy. And there could be, at the end of that, something like, result in something like we have in California and Michigan, where the law schools are prohibited by law from practicing affirmative action. Could go across the nation. Justice Scalia, before he died, actually to me, tipped off something, because in the oral arguments on that case, he raised the question of the so-called mismatch approach to law school admissions. That's where the top schools, the elite schools, Yale's, Harvard, Michigan, they pull up students from the level below, and you get a mismatch, because it goes up through the bottom. The next school down pulls up from the one below, pulls up from the one below. And his theory is if the elite schools stop admitting on an affirmative action basis, everybody would filter down to the level where they actually belong based on their credentials, and they would be successful, compete just like anybody else in the group. I think it's a good possibility, depending on how it goes with the absence of Judge Scalia, that we're going to very well have the theory that Thomas Sowell, many of you know, the very conservative black professor, has been espousing for years. You know, his time might have come. And another thing that convinced me that probably might not be a good idea, it might be a good idea to talk about some of my own personal history, was a letter to the editor, State Bar Journal editor, about an article that I wrote. If you haven't seen it, May 2015, it's about the Henderson case, and Judge Robeson, Dalton Robeson, this handsome judge sitting right here, who, by the way, I think was one of the finest judges ever sit on a recorder's court in Detroit. Courageous judge, not captured by the police nor the prosecutor, was very independent, always admired him. He wrote a letter. The Henderson, if you didn't read it, let me walk through it real quickly. It's a case where you talk about Southern justice somewhere. You got a black man who hears there's a warrant out for his arrest. He turns himself in to the police in one city. They take him into custody. They drive him to the city where the crime allegedly occurred, 50, 60 miles away. They interrogate him. They book him. He asks for a lawyer. They say, no, you can't have a lawyer. He has to call his brother, make a phone call. His brother said, no, you can't have a phone call, your brother. They fingerprinted him, took him over to a courthouse, got a judge to come in. It's 10 p.m. in the evening. Got a judge to come in, open the court up. They put him on trial. The only person that testified to trial was the defendant himself. The complaining witness was not in court. The only ones there were the police, prosecutor, judge, and defendant. After examining him by the prosecutor, judge, asking the questions, the judge concluded, he said, well, based upon what the defendant said, I have no doubt in my mind that what the complaining witness said was true. The complaining witness never got anywhere near the courthouse. He said, I hereby, it's the worst case I've had in my 15 years of sitting on the bench. I hereby sentence you to life in prison. And they put him in a scout car, drove him away to go to prison. Now I ask you, how long do you think this took? From the pickup, the 50, 60 mile drive, court, the trial drive, how long did it take? 3.5 hours. The Henderson case. Okay? 3.5 hours. What state did this damn case happen in? The thing was Southern justice in which state did it happen in? Michigan. Michigan, 1942. Disgraceful. He did 20 years before he got paroled. After many appeals, Ernest Goodman, who I think was the greatest civil rights, civil liberties attorney in the history of the United States, Ernest Goodman was his post-conviction lawyer. The case received quite a bit of attention when Justice Potter Stewart was up for confirmation to sit on the United States Supreme Court. The Henderson case came up because he had coined a phrase when he sat on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. By the way, young law students, you ever get a case and it's an important case, coin a phrase. The press will pick it up, you'll become famous. No question about it. He coined the phrase, swift justice demands more than just swiftness. And that stuck with the case, stuck with Potter Stewart, and it was, in his confirmation, it was given as his bona fides for being a champion of civil rights. There was as I said, Judge Robeson wrote a letter to the editor, of course, praising the article, praising him. And then he said in part, and I quote, our age group is the last of the African American lawyers who were confronted with actual segregation. Most of the lawyers from the 1930s and 1940s have passed away. And that kind of got me. I said, you young people here, do you really understand when you read these things in a book what kind of true impact it had on lawyers, especially black lawyers, trying to practice law in this community, how difficult it was. And people ask, why do you get interested in history of African lawyers? Why not? It's compelling. It's absolutely compelling. I became a fanatic. Just about my art collection the judge mentioned was all African American artists. It's a great collection of African American artists. I've been downsizing that along with a lot of other things, Judge, but it was a great collection. I once was going to write a book on art, but how to build and amass a great art collection with little or no money. Use your wit, not your wallet. So I was able to do it. Anyway, the importance of these histories, which led to the Keith collection, was important. As I said, it became terribly captivating to me. I mean, I spent my days and nights doing this stuff. And somehow I was trying to think, how can you convey to somebody who didn't experience this, the sting and the absolute humiliation of having someone tell you, you have to leave here, you cannot eat here because you're colored. We don't serve colored people here. This is in the city of Detroit. I can remember it as it was yesterday, being refused service in 3 restaurants, 2 in downtown Detroit. One, believe it or not, is some damn silly-ass restaurant across the street from Belle Isle on Jefferson Avenue. We don't serve coloreds here. And how that makes you feel, how does it do with your self-esteem? I know when I was a kid, we used to talk among ourselves, I don't know if we let this out of school or not, we didn't want to be Negroes. It breaks your self-esteem to have these kinds of experiences. And that was true across the board. It was not only in service in public places, it's education, dealing with the police, employment. Speaking of not eating, being refused service, there's some institutions, and I have a bad attitude about this. I really do. My attitude is terrible about this kind of thing, because I can remember being walked out of the downtown YMCA, walked out of the building, onto the platform they had out there. The guy pointed up the street, said, your YMCA is down there. It's a St. Antoine branch. You remember that, Judge? St. Antoine branch. I walked down, took a look at it. I have never been in the YMCA since. I know I should go, because it's a whole different thing now, but I can't. Same thing, Detroit Athletic Club. I can't go in there. I should, because it's a great institution. As a matter of fact, the president sitting behind Judge Keith, great president. And I should mention this, because it shows how far we've come. Ken is Jewish. And can you imagine that, DAC? Blacks could not go in the place. Women had to go in a side door, you young people. If you were a woman, wanted to go in, they would let you in, but you had to walk around. You had to walk around and go in the side door. Now, interesting aside to that is the Black Ys, there was a black woman's YMCA. Judge, you remember the name of it? Lucy Thurman Branch. I interviewed Ernest Goodman, George Crockett, hundreds of hours of tapes. 2 of the great lawyers, 2 of the really great lawyers, I think, this community, this country has ever seen. They talked about the Lucy Thurman Branch because that was one place in downtown Detroit that black and white could go and break bread together. You could actually eat a meal in the Lucy Thurman Branch cafeteria in downtown Detroit. And Ernie used to say, we used to get tired because they could not have lunch in the building where they had a law practice. There was a restaurant on the first floor. They were refused service. They said, we get tired of fighting with these restaurants in downtown Detroit. We go up to the Lucy Thurman Branch and have lunch. The one place you could eat with dignity in downtown Detroit. Judge Keith, you see the thing flash up there, Hamtramck? There was a case, a landmark case of opinion of Judge Keith, a very complex discrimination relocation case. The name was Garrett versus the City of Hamtramck. Now, the only problem I have with that case is it too long to get to Judge Keith. I lived in those dumps. I grew up in those houses that were the subject of that thing. They were called little shotgun row houses. I think they were built for foundry workers at Dodge Main Plant, which was right up the street, spewing all that shit out, and a cemetery, a walled cemetery across the street, called shotgun houses. You can shoot a shotgun through there, through the front door, and it goes straight through out the back without hitting anything. 3 rooms stacked on top of one another. Front room, middle room, with a coal stove in it. In the wintertime, you freeze your ass off unless you were near that stove. If you were in the front room, where the beds were, you had to get somebody to sleep with you to stay warm. Then you go into the kitchen, stove, no hot water heater. Off to the kitchen was a bathroom, just a toilet. So if you're going to take a bath, you'd get the big tin wash tub, put it on the floor, go over to the stove, heat up some water, pour the water in the tub, you stand in the tub, and you take a bath. I mean, that's where we were living. I lived there through part of elementary school, all of junior high, and 2 years into high school. Fortunately, I seldom had to bathe in that tin tub because I was captain of the high school swimming team, believe it or not. And I could take 2 showers if I wanted, 2 showers a day. Now, speaking of school, today our mantra is equal opportunity for all. Back then, it was no opportunity for them. If anything, we deny them opportunity. When I graduated from Hamtramck High, I was 5th in the class, member of the National Honor Society, captain swimming team. Last year I went out and earned a lettered in football. Now, it was the custom then, and I'm sure some of you back then had the experience, that when you're exiting high school, you go in for a career counselor. You go see a career counselor for an interview about what your future plans are, what you want to do when you graduate from high school. And you hear rumors and you hear stories about how awful some of those sessions were. Well, I can tell you it's true. I had one. I met with the career planning counselor. I told him my ambition was to be a physician. I wanted to be a doctor. It didn't take him long. He immediately told me because I was, in the words, I'm almost quoting, because you're colored, there's no chance you're going to become a doctor. And then he fiddled around with my transcript, went down, here I'm doing well in science, all A's in science, including physics, A's. He ignored all of that. He looked at a class I had in bookbinding. Hamtramck was so cheap, they offered a class in bookbinding so the students would bind the books that would go into the library in the school. So I took that course, bookbinding, learn how to bookbind. He says, I see you have bookbinding on your transcript. I think you ought to look for a career doing some work where you're using your hands. And that was the end of that. I walked out of Hamtramck High School, no scholarship. They had them. I know they had them because I found out later when I finally got to Wayne that some of my classmates were there, way down in the class. And a lot of them were, I don't know if it's politically correct now, we used to call them displaced persons. They were DPs just right after the Second World War, Polish and Hamtramck. A lot of DPs were on scholarships at Wayne. Got nuts. So I walked out, nothing. Started looking for work. I actually got a job working on DeSoto automobile assembly line. Now I tell you, if you got anybody in your family that works in the automobile plant on the assembly line, you go home and give them a big kiss and a hug and say, God bless you, because that's about the worst goddamn job you can get on the assembly line. I lasted a year. But I had such a passion, such a desire to go to school that I wanted to go, so I quit. By now I'm on my own, totally, fully self-supporting on my own. Came down here to Wayne, I've been around Wayne since 1954. Enrolled in pre-med, got half a room over in Old Webster Hall that was there, Judge Keith might remember. Webster Hall, got a part-time job at the medical school library. It's interesting, they had an interesting room in there. It's called a section room. It was locked. So I was to be there at night, nobody would be there. I get the key and you can go back in there and read about all these weird people that the doctors have to read about in that sex room. You know, it was good. The job had some fringe benefits. Anyway, I got 2.5 years in before the bottom just fell out of everything. You know, no money, no clothes, nothing, trying to go to school, was hustling the sisters of Delta Sigma Theta. They would be cooking over in the old Maine over there. You go and get you something to eat, the sisters would feed you. You know, and I was spending some nights in the movie theaters, all night. Down Woodward Avenue, they had movie theaters open all night. I used to like the Fine Arts Theater because you could get in there and watch 3 Randolph Scott movies for 75 cents. Spend the night, come out and try to, it's a silly ass way to try to go to school. And I often look back and wonder, the reason I'm telling you the story, what would have happened if Hamtramck High had done the right thing? This judge said, do the right thing and give me a little boost, you know? So I did what every poor kid in the inner city does when you don't have a job, back in those days especially. I joined the Army. 2 years. I never knocked the Army. I got 3 meals a day and somewhere to sleep, which I didn't have before I went in. And when I got out, I had the GI Bill. And I used the GI Bill to go back to school, finish up. Now, it took me a total of 11 years to finish off the bachelor's degree. And I wonder often what would have happened had I got some help from the school that could have helped, but they refused to help any black students at that time. Went to law school at night. Detroit College of Law, real tough school. Virtually all the Dennis was there at night. Judge Robertson was there at night. Virtually all the black students, this is pre-affirmative action, were in night school. I think we had 1 student in day school. 30-something were going to night school. Average age was over 30. It's like a second career. This is pre-affirmative action. And you'd come out of law school, you'd be in your middle 30s, damn near 40s. Now, I had an aptitude for law, apparently. Like high school, I think Peter or Judge mentioned I was first in my class. Graduated number 1, that's depending on how you count it. They graduated 4 classes together. If it was a class I started with, I was first. If you put all 4 of them together, I was second. So I was either first or second, depending on how you count. And left law school. There were no job offers. Not a one. First in the class. Not a single job offer because white firms did not hire black lawyers at that time. Dickinson Wright did it the year we graduated in 1970. There were no black judges in this city. Detroit was in the backwaters. They had black judges in other cities like New York, Chicago, or something long before Detroit. There were no black judges in this city, which had an impact on black lawyers. You can't get assignments, or get few, which are important lifeblood in many practices at that point, particularly young lawyers, criminal court, probate court, and so on. Couldn't get assignments. Plus, you lack the prestige and recognition in your own community as having some power and influence in the bench. There are no black judges. And many black lawyers at that time lost clients to white lawyers. And I'm sure that in part was the reason, the result of seeing that black lawyers had little or no power. Now, if I told you that the city of Detroit and the city of Detroit, black lawyers could not rent office space in downtown Detroit west of Woodward Avenue. They were relegated to space over on Gratiot and Broadway. The famous Tobin building is famous now. Next time you go by there, tip your hat, because that's where a lot of black lawyers were, in the Tobin building, right on Broadway and Gratiot. Couldn't go across. One of the, Judge Keith, his firm was the first to get space in the prestigious Guardian building. 1964, his firm moved into the Guardian building. That was quite a firm. He had a lot of important clients in the black community, corporate clients. He had a lot of business to corporate clients. He had a brilliant staff of lawyers. He had brilliant lawyers working with you, Judge. Myron Walls became the first Michigan Court of Appeals, black Court of Appeals judge. Nathan Conyers was there. Conyers Ford was with Judge Keefe. It was a great deal. Great friend, Joe Brown. You know, it was a great firm. So that's kind of an inkling of what it was like to be a black lawyer. And I always admired black lawyers because I wondered it was like black artists, same feeling I had black artists. Couldn't get in museums, couldn't get in dealerships, couldn't get any grants, couldn't get anything. I want to say, why in the hell do you keep doing this? What in the hell is wrong with you? You know, same with black lawyers. I had respect for lawyers that kept doing it. Some sold insurance, others did other kind of things, try to get clients, you know. Why do you do this? Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if somebody's going to keep me on time. The 3 great ass kickings I got in my life were by policemen. And remember, I'm a good kid. I'm an honor student, an athlete, hell, you know, I had a job. The 3 ass kickings I got were by police. Well, I'll just tell you about one, maybe 2. Leaving practice one day, going across the field, there's a bonfire, some railroad ties are sitting up, they're burning. Somebody set a bonfire with these railroad ties. So we're walking past, suddenly a light goes on to the right, damn cops sitting in the car with the light out waiting on some food to come by to cut through. So me and my buddy, they grabbed us, told us to pull that goddamn bonfire apart. They pull it apart with our hands. Every time you bend over to get one, they kick you in the ass. And you know, you're there getting a beating, you can't do anything about it. And what goes through your mind, really, is these crazy people, are they gonna kill me? And they could have, nothing would have happened to them. They could have. So we tore the thing apart, let's go. Second thing happened, same thing behind my house, the alleys, the house in Hamtramck you relocated. Had lousy alleys behind them, cops sitting in there with the light out, same thing. Turn the light on, you crazy, they walk by, they have somebody like to kick you in the ass. You know. Same thing. Anybody here know what the big foe is? Huh? Everybody know? Bob Settler, you know what the big foe is? The big foe. You see all these hands going up, people know what the big foe is? The judge knows what the big foe is. Man, the big foe was the big foe. It meant 4, the big 4. Cop in uniform, 3 in plain clothes. 4 of them in there. You remember from equity, when you took equity, it said the chancellor does not stoop to pick up pens. Remember that phrase? The chancellor does not stoop to pick up pens, meaning he doesn't deal with trivialities. Seriously. The big 4 didn't screw around with ordinary crime. They saved them for bank robbers. Because they'd flip that trunk open, there'd be submachine guns in there, bazookas, whatever the hell you could find, armament, and they dealt with very serious business. So they'd bypass some little minor crime and stuff. They stopped me one night, the big 4. And it's kind of ironic, it was on the corner of Claremont and 12th Street. Anybody know what that means? Huh? I bet Bob Settler doesn't know what that means. That's where the riot started in '67. Right on the corner of Claremont, they stopped me. I had some dirt on the license plate of this car that I was driving, a friend of mine, on a date trying to impress this young lady. I had no means of getting the car, borrowed a car. They stopped me because there's dirt on there, got me out of the car in the back, said, take that off. I said, okay, officer, I'll do it when I get home. You do it now. Do it with your hand. So I'm scraping this thing off. As I'm scraping it, he's kicking me in the ass again. I don't know what it was about me, my ass, but I got an ass kicking by the big. That's just the way it was. Nobody could do anything about it. Nobody could do anything about it. Once the police came to my house, I'm 15, 16, I don't know what I was doing, I wasn't doing anything. I'm still an honor student and stuff. They took me into custody, took me downtown, into police headquarters, put me in a lineup. I was that far away from going to prison, a bad identification. Put me in a lineup. I wasn't the one. They let me go, but they didn't take me back home. They left me out in front of the police headquarters, 1300 Bogan. And it's kind of ironic because later, picture me as, I guess it's still hanging up on the 3rd floor in police headquarters. A picture of me hanging up there from when I was on the chairman of the police committee. It's kind of ironic. how these things come around. But just think of how many black kids didn't survive this kind of stuff. My high school class, there's only one other black student I know that became a success. He's a professor retired now at the University of Washington. And in the black community, what you read about, the main word was never call the police. Don't call the police. Because if you call them and they come, it's going to get worse. Whatever the thief didn't steal, they would take, and you're going to wind up in trouble because you're going to get in trouble with the police. Don't call the police. Never file a complaint against the police. Now, this is true from my experience in the police department and writing about this stuff, that don't file a complaint, because if you do, you're going to get arrested or you're going to get your ass kicked. So black people knew not to file a complaint against police. Now, if you really needed a police officer, really had to have one come, you'd call up and say, I don't know, they didn't have 911, you'd call up and say, anybody know what you say? You're close.
Police in trouble.
Huh?
Police in trouble.
Police what?
In trouble.
That would do it. Something else?
Officer now?
No. There's a black man beating a white woman. Hey, weren't black officers in the police department then? Very few. Those they had patrolled the black community. They were in segregated cars well up into the 1960s. And they would have a cop, some cop. Judge, you remember Ben Turpin? You remember Ben Turpin?
I remember all of it.
He was a huge black man. Police officer. He was called a thug with a badge. He patrolled Black Bottom, kept them in line, mostly by cracking heads and stuff. And that's what the police department, they encouraged that. They didn't fight anything. And I'll tell you the thing, I'll get off police in a minute. It was no accident I got on the police commission. I lobbied for it. I worked my way onto it. I'd been at Columbia, fortunate enough to get into the doctoral program there. The head of the program was a great professor named Walter Gilhorn. He was an expert, the world's leading expert on ombudsman citizens complaints. He wrote a great book called When Citizens Complain. And he did Japanese, all the different kind of countries and stuff. So studying under him, I got interested in, given my personal history with police, I got interested in systems to control police misconduct, police brutality. Bill Beckham, if you might remember, was the deputy mayor. Malcolm Dade was the chief assistant of, Tim, that's the whole thing now? Yeah, I've been talking now? I got through them and got appointed police commission, where I worked on citizen complaints, helped write the first citizen complaint procedures, which were very good in Detroit. I was very high on the police commission in Detroit because it was internal. It had awesome powers. But I also wrote that the mayor would have to be careful who he appointed. They understood what the role was. I later become very disappointed in the police commission. Also, I wrote in one of the articles, I wrote that lawsuits against the police, at least in Detroit, had no effect on deterring police misconduct, none. Because the city would defend the suits, pay the judgments, and move on to the next case. They never filtered back into the police department. Maybe that's something the panel will talk about. They never filtered back. So I had the idea of going over to the law department. I went over there when I was chairman of the police commission. I went over there and met with the acting head of the police department. The acting head of the law department. Told him what I wanted, gave him my spiel. And here I almost got a quote because I remember it. He told me, he said, look, I don't have time for this bullshit. The police hit him in the head and I defend them. That's it. End of story. Now, I can't believe he was talking to me, chairman of the police commission, without having cleared that kind of speech from somebody, either the chief, because we were always at tension with the chief, or perhaps even the mayor himself. I wanted to talk about Ernest Goodman. And what have I got, 5 minutes? Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ernest Goodman and George Crockett. I think that you history buffs probably should know. I do think Ernest Goodman was the greatest civil rights, civil liberties lawyer to ever exist in private practice. I'm not talking about institutions. I'm talking about in a law firm, small law firm in Detroit. 1950, first racially integrated law firm. Goodman, Crockett, Eden, and Robb. Goodman told me he purposely insisted on Crockett's name being second so he would send a message, because Eden had more seniority than Crockett, but he wanted to be known, and that was, as far as anybody knows, was the first racially integrated law firm in the United States. Crockett, in case you don't know, you should get familiar, young people should get familiar with Judge Crockett, the senior Crockett, George W. Crockett Jr. He's most famous for, if you have constitutional law here, I'm sure you study. Bob, is a Dennis case still in the law books? He was one of the 5 defense lawyers that defended the leadership of the Communist Party, 1949-50, longest trial in the history of the United States, 9 months. 11-12, communist leadership. That case broke the Communist Party in the United States. 5 lawyers, labor lawyers. Crockett was never a communist. He told me he never even read Das Kapital before he took the job of defending the communists. The communists were found guilty. Judge Medina turned to the lawyers and say, now I have some unfinished business. He had them stand up. He had a list of contempt citation. And he cited them for contempt, sentenced to prison. Those days, you didn't get a hearing. You didn't get an opportunity to defend yourself. You didn't get an opportunity to have it heard before another judge. This all came later. You get cited for contempt, off to jail. I'll tell you one of the worst things I've seen is Judge Crockett, his 4 colleagues, these were white labor lawyers, very prominent labor lawyers, walking out of the courthouse, manacled, handcuffed, business suit on, Crockett wearing his hat, manacled, doing a perp walk. They walked them out onto a dock so that the photographers would take pictures of them. And it appeared on the front page of the New York Times. George Crockett and his colleagues handcuffed, lawyers going to prison. He did 4 months he asked not to be sent to a southern prison where segregated. They sent him straight to Kentucky. Ashland, Kentucky. He did 4 months. He once told me, he said, Ed, I know what it means to send somebody to prison, because I've been there. He became a judge after he got back, defeated the effort to disbar him. Because at that time, if you were defending a communist, you were subject to a disbarment proceeding. Even the United States attorney advocated state bars to discipline lawyers who would defend communists. The Red Scare was so intense and so great at that time, the Red Fear, that communists couldn't find lawyers to defend them. And that whole business about sentencing became another case, soccer versus U.S., soccer versus U.S., where that eventually changed. I tell you, there was another case that negated an aspect of soccer. The case was named Taylor versus Hayes. Taylor versus Hayes. The case was argued by a brilliant young lawyer named Bob Settler, Robert Settler's case. Went to the United States Supreme Court and overturned some of the soccer cases. Bob, we thank you. We thank you for that. I want to mention one more case. It's coming up in this journal they're published. I think it's in there. It's a matter of Leon Mosley. This has to do with police conduct. And what this case illustrates is the prosecutorial and judicial conspiracy in these police misconduct cases that occurred in the past. Now, some of it exists today. Judge Robertson might talk about that, I don't know, today, but it's in a different guise. Here's a case that demonstrates in a police brutality case what a judge would put in an opinion on the record. This was Leon Mosley. Many witnesses testified that 14-year-old Leon Mosley, Miller High School student, was beaten by Detroit police officers, and he was shot in the back as he attempted to run away. The prosecutor refused to charge the officer. Ernie Goodman's firm, the Goodman firm, Goodman and Crockett, they represented the Mosley family. They came up with a novel idea of forcing a coroner's inquest, which would get you in front of a jury, but it would be a coroner's jury. They came back, they found the officer guilty, and he was charged with manslaughter, which would then be tried in the recorder's court. And they got, not surprisingly, the police officer waived the jury and went for a bench trial. And the bench trial was before Judge Arthur E. Gordon. And his written opinion, I think, is a rare example of the gross, venomous judicial bigotry expressed openly in a written opinion. Now, it happened all too often, but most of them weren't crazy enough to put it in writing. Although he wasn't very crazy because nothing happened to him. Okay, here we go. Following a statement of facts, Judge Gordon wrote and additional facts and opinions about them. From this point, the testimony differs. A group of Negro witnesses, which had been herded into the office of Ernie Goodman, the brains of the Maurice Sugar law firm in the Barnum Tower, by some of the pink members of the NAACP, insisted dramatically that from 2 to 7 police officers beat the driver with pistols and fists until he escaped from them, and the defendant police officer shot him in the back while he was running away. Another group testified quietly and soberly that they heard shots in the alley, heard and saw a chase of cars on Waterloo Street, heard a crash, dark car against a tree, saw the officer try to grasp the driver as he tried to escape. I'm sure you lawyers know what that escape means. Through the right-hand door of a stolen car, heard cries, "Halt! Stop!" Saw the driver run from West Waterloo, saw the defendant shoot at the fugitive, keyword, and the fugitive fell onto the brick pavement of Waterloo Street, saw the police officer pick up the fugitive, 3 times he mentioned it, and carry him to a place of safety between the curb and sidewalk. Now, the fugitive stuff and running away is important because at that time they had you could shoot a fleeing felon legally. No matter how big the felony was, you could shoot him. And running away, you shoot him. That changed. What was it? Tennessee versus Garner? Garner versus Tennessee? Yeah. It's worthy of notice, this is the judge continuing, that the witness who made the wildest accusations of beating with fists and pistols by 3, 4, and 7 police officers were of a group produced by the NAACP and sent to the Barnum Tower to be interviewed by the pink devotees of agitation. And their testimony was contradicted by others of the same race, of equal or superior intelligence, and with the same opportunities for observation. The judge concluded the defendants are not guilty of the charge here presented. Okay. He should be commended as an alert police officer if the handful of communist agitators who are trying to ruin the credible work of the NAACP cared to do a good deed for once in their pink lives, they would raise money to replace the automobile stolen by Mosley. Now that's a hell of an opinion for a judge to write, huh? Raise money to pay the dead. Now, of course, Goodman and them sent letters back or over, and that opinion got wide circulation throughout the country, if not around the world. Nothing happened to nobody criticized it. Goodman wrote, and there was a poem in the letter he wrote, "Through all the king's court they searched, but nowhere could they find another who had head so big or such a narrow mind." Close quote. That was great. I'm going to conclude now and just say a couple more things, if I may. Incidents like Leon Mosley were not unusual in Detroit, killing people. There's another one, famous one, a prostitute ran away, Cynthia Scott shot her in the back. Big upheaval over that, nothing happened in the end. Considering my background, well, let's say that after years of centuries of slavery, Jim Crow, decades of separate but equal, our country still struggles with race and racism, education, housing, employment, criminal justice. I think we owe a debt to Professor Hammer, Sean and Rachel, and the students at the Journal of Law and Society for this timely seminar. One thing I can think of, it's kind of interesting, we talk about students and what's coming or what's happening with missions. If you think about my background, coming out of Hamtramck, being homeless, going to the Army, graduating law school at age 35 or some damn thing like that, going to second-rate law school, I could not be on this faculty today. There's no way I could be on a law faculty. Now, maybe they ought to take some risks on some folks like me at some point, but it's not going to happen. So those of you who are students here ought to be thankful you got Professor Cook and Professor Williams here, who would do you proud. Because folks like me, you aren't going to see them on faculties anymore. But I can say this, my favorite movie, I hope it's some of yours, is Lonesome Dove. You're familiar with that movie? That's a great. I'm reminded of what Augustus McCrae, who was Robert Duvall, said to Woodrow Call, was Tommy Lee Jones. Lonesome Dove, he was dying. They'd cut off one leg, blood poison, he wouldn't give him the t'other. They had to cut off the other one or he would die, he wouldn't give it to him. And he said to Call, quote, "By God, Woodrow, it's been quite a party, ain't it?" Close quote. I think that I want to thank Wayne State University. See, I've been around here in some form or other since 1954, and the law school for giving me quite a party. Thank you, and thank everybody for coming.